Hey, good afternoon to anyone who is watching this live or happen to scroll and come across me sharing my thoughts about what it means to live an integrated life as a disciple of Christ. I just came out from a short personal retreat myself, a time of silence, a time of solitude. And the last time I went away for some dedicated alone time with God and myself was about a year ago. And, the thing that struck me on the first night after I settled into the retreat center, into the silence, was I felt a little lonely. And then it struck me, it's been a while since I noticed my loneliness, right? Because the last year has been really busy, and also because of the pandemic, my husband has been working from home a lot more. So there's someone in the house, right? Even if we're not talking to each other all the time, there's someone in the house. And I have a little dog that, in her old age and being blind is getting more and more sticky to me. So I'm rarely alone. And without some complete time of just being on my own, I've lost touch with that loneliness that's inside me, right? It's almost like I've forgotten that it was there. It's still there. And that's the thing, right? When there's no space to kind of like connect with ourselves at a deeper level, I think we forget, what's happening in the deeper parts of ourselves. And I'm talking about that. I'm leading with that because when we talk about integration, it's something that happens as a transformation from a very deep place inside of us. Okay, so in my bio, in my IG bio, if you take a look at it, there's this line, live an integrated, authentic life, right, in Christ. Why is it that it's so important, or it's so much about what I do and what I speak about that it's right there in my bio? I have been, serious about my faith, about my relationship with Christ since I would say 15. Or 18. 18 was like the biggest kind of like turning point when I first really intentionally began to build this relationship with Christ. So I would say I have a personal relationship with him since I was 18, right? That's more than 20 years ago now. But for a large part of my life, although that relationship with Christ was very important to me, I struggled with how to harmonize that with all the different parts of my life. I didn't know why I was struggling, but as I went along and I grew, I began to notice that a lot of other people also struggle with harmonizing the different parts of our life, right? So hi to those of you who are joining and are here. Hi, Angel. Hi, Mariana. Okay, I'm not really good at multitasking. Those of you who know me would know that. So I am not going to be constantly gazing or checking out any comments. But hey, if later you guys want to park a question, leave a comment, you're more than welcome to, okay? I'm actually still talking my way into this about what it means to live an integrated life as a disciple of Christ and why that's important. Okay, so something that I've noticed, not only in my life, but in a lot of the lives of people around me who wish to take their relationship with God more seriously. Okay, so I'm assuming that applies to you, because if that's not you, you're probably not following me on this account. But there are many of us who wish to deepen this relationship with God. But it's just one part of our lives, and we struggle to see how that can connect with when, we're struggling at work or at home, with difficult children, or when we're struggling with our spouse. And it's almost like our lives are just, broken into different fragments, right? Different parts, and there's no harmony there. And this applies to even those of us who have gone for many courses about, theology, or we do scripture study. For a lot of us who take our spiritual life seriously, we make it a point to, let's say, go for retreats, right? We can do all that, and we can still find that our lives are fragmented. And it's like we're one person when we're in ministry. We talk one way, we behave one way, but we're like a completely different person when we're at home. And that's a very painful reality, right? Because we can pretend to other people, but we can't pretend to ourselves. Or I can say, actually, sometimes we can do a very good job even pretending to ourselves. So we can disconnect with the reality inside us, that we think that we're doing okay, but we often perform when we need to perform, right? Whether it's at work or in church. But those who are closest to us, they know the truth. And that tends to be, our spouses, our children, our family members, the ones that are closest to us, and that's why they usually get hurt the most, right? And we wonder sometimes why is it that so many of our young people want nothing to do with the church, after confirmation. And I know for a fact that a lot of times it's because, especially when we're young, we actually see a lot of this hypocrisy. We see the lack of integration in the lives of our parents and the people that we know. And something in us says no, right? No to this, because God created us for harmony, right? In relationship to Him, to ourselves, and to one another. And the reason why our lives are so fragmented, why our relationships with people can be a mess, is because there's disharmony and disintegration and fragmentation from within ourselves. Now, integration, though, is not something that we often hear or talk about, right? For those of us who begin to take our spiritual lives more seriously, maybe we know we need to learn to pray. Maybe we try and, go for Bible classes. Like I said, some of us may try and form our intellect. And at times we go away for retreats. But we can also find that over many years of doing that, nothing real has changed. No deep transformation has happened in our lives, right? Even if we go for annual retreats. And there are people who can go for annual retreats, even silent individual retreats, and over a decade, nothing much has changed. They're still as lost as ever. They are still as confused as ever about where their lives are going. What their lives are about, their relationships could still be a tangled mess. We're still struggling with the same things that we struggled 10 years ago. Why is that? I think a big part of that is not lack of desire. I think a lot of us, we have that desire, but we don't understand about integration, right? So because of that, whenever we do take action for our spiritual lives, they are very discrete and separate things that we do. They don't come as a whole. They don't form a whole. And that's because we haven't found the center. Integration, like I said, comes from a very deep place within us, right? That's where God transforms us from. And without conscious, ongoing, intentional integration of the various parts of ourselves, even as human beings, our mind, our heart, our bodies, our spirit. I mean, how many of us live our spiritual lives or our relationship with God, I want to say, as a whole person? Or is it only through our understanding? Some of us, our relationship with God, or our faith, I wouldn't even say relationship with God, maybe faith, is just totally intellect-based, right? We may know a lot of things about theology, about scripture. We can have debates, but that's where it is. It remains only at the level of our intellect, of the head. How can our faith, if that's our faith, inform our relationships with one another? Because it's all theory, right? Some of us, maybe faith is about practice, it's about what we do, right? About going to church, serving in church. But where's that doing flowing from? Where's it coming from? If that's also just out of an understanding that this is what I should do or have to do, then it's not connected with our heart. It's not even really fully connected with our mind, our intellect in a deeper way, right? We could go about doing all these things like zombies. We can just do all these rituals and it doesn't mean anything at all. And we can, check off that box and says, I'm a good practicing Christian because I've gone for a service or mass, I serve in ministry, I help out in this or that. Again, how is it connected to the rest of my life? It isn't. It doesn't. Another part which I'm finding more and more, I'm just discovering myself, right? Why we're not integrated is I have come to think of faith as something almost separate from my physical self, my body, right? And there are a lot of reasons for that, many of which is cultural, or not just cultural in terms of where we live, but also I think church culture, or history. But it has done a great disservice, I think, to a lot of us when we who are already very disconnected with the bodies that God created us with, gifted us with, right, in our daily lives, then disconnect further from our bodies when we start to take our faith seriously, because we think that the spiritual life is one where the spirit is, like elevated as much more important, and our bodies just get in the way, right? And so we think, we should not be sensitive to the needs that come from our physical self. And right there is something that, as I reflect on it more and more, it doesn't make sense, because God created us whole. He wouldn't have given us any part of our intellect, our bodies, our hearts, our spirits, if it wasn't a part about being fully, beautifully human, right? The creatures that He created us to be. So what happens when we don't know how to live in harmony with all these, aspects of ourselves? What happens when our faith is just on the surface? It doesn't engage us, mind, body, heart, and spirit. Well, then we can't have a real relationship with God. Because relationships don't work that way, right? I mean, relationships are not about theory. Relationships are not about applying theory, even if you want to talk about practice. So many of us, we think that living our faith means applying the theory of what we learn about theology and scripture into our lives. Well, tell me how that works out. I mean, how do you apply something that, you learn conceptually? You find again and again, you can't, because there are forces within you, there are forces within us beyond what our mind can command, our will can command, that we need to understand or acknowledge, right? And welcome and learn to let Christ integrate in us. Okay, and the way to reach that harmony is not by ignoring uncomfortable feelings or our neediness or our loneliness. All these things, they actually have something interesting and important to say to us. It is not intuitive, and most of us have, I think, grown up in a way where just to survive emotionally, we cut ourselves off from our feelings. We kind of decide to just learn to just power through and be independent and not express our needs. But because of all that, we have become disintegrated, fragmented individuals. And what happens when we actually enter a real relationship with Christ is He begins to start to pull all these different fragments together to make us whole again, more whole, right? It's a process, it's a transformation process. It takes a long time. There's no quick fix to this. There is no shortcut, but nothing, no words can describe the process of being integrated in our deeper selves by God, right? So, I don't know. I mean, what is what I said, how does it land with you? Is it something new? Have you thought of these things before about why is it that even when you wish to, live your faith, right? We always talk about it, to try to embody and live our faith, we can't, right? Is it because, like I said, we try to just apply theory? and find that it doesn't work. And we don't even recognize that there are impediments inside us. So there are obstacles inside us that prevent us from flowing, from living out what we have started to understand in our mind. Okay, so that is, that was the little sharing that I wanted to talk about what I mean usually when I talk about integration in terms of our life as a disciple. Does it resonate with anyone? I mean, if what you've heard resonates so far, give me an indication. Maybe you could, I think, give me a thumbs up or an emoticon. I'm very new to this IG live thing. Okay, it's only my second live, so. Or if you have any questions or anything, feel free to park it in the comments. Okay, I will try and say a little bit something more in case anyone does have something that you would like to park in the comments. Yes, so integration. I have an experience from many years ago when I was asked to step in to lead a prayer service for a group of ministry leaders, young adults. And when we were all deep in prayer, I had this deep sense, that while we were talking about leadership and while we were praying and we were learning about the faith, nobody in that room felt safe enough to actually be honest about the struggles in their lives and the ways in which the reality of their lives do not match their understanding, right? What they think is what a good Christian, a good Catholic leader should be. Right there, that's an example of a lack of integration in our lives when we feel like there's something we should measure up to, some kind of end goal, that we cannot be true and honest about where we are, and no one helps us to learn and understand what it means to begin where we are, wherever we are, and what is it that we need to do so that the change that needs to happen from within us can begin to happen. That change ultimately it comes from grace, right? Only Christ can actually effect that change. But there is something we can do. There's an action, a response from us that is required. And if we don't know what the response is, if we don't have a safe space for us to ask those questions that we need to ask and to just acknowledge, just at the surface level, I struggle with chastity, for example. I mean, how many of us don't struggle with chastity, especially when you're a young adult or youth young adult, right? But are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to say that and not feel that we're going to be judged or get a lecture about what it means to be a good Christian, especially if you're a leader? That reminds me, actually, I mean, when we raise people to leadership, that's another thing that we never consider usually. Are we putting someone in a position that's going to make it much more difficult for him or her to have integrity in their lives? Okay, this is not a judgment about the person, okay, because leadership has its responsibilities, right? There's a weight to that. It's actually love for the person that we want to raise as a leader to really ask the question, are they whole enough for the burden that we're asking them to carry? Whole in the sense of solid enough. Because if there are many things in their lives that are still fragmented and they're suffering and they're in pain and they're lost, and they don't even have the capacity to sort things out for themselves, and then we make them responsible for other people's lives, other people's spiritual journeys, that is a very unloving and unmerciful thing that we do, I think. And a lot of times the truth is, it's not just young adults, but adults of any age. A lot of times our leaders are in pain and suffering and their lives are not integrated, right? And I think a lot of times it's because we don't understand how important this integration is. And when we talk about integration, it means inner work, because when Christ touches us in a deep way, in a deep place, he doesn't leave us as he finds us, right? But that also means that he heals us, right? But he doesn't heal us without our permission. And this healing that I'm talking about, it's not just on the spiritual plane or what we often think of, in terms of just healing prayers. That's powerful. That's important. I'm not denying any of that. And everything, even in the natural world, right, is there from my worldview as a disciple of Christ, is there because it's a gift from God. Okay? Science, medicine, everything, I mean, ultimately, the source is God, right? But when we talk about integration, I say that's very important because a lot of times when people start taking their faith seriously, they only think of one dimension. They only think in terms of what they think is the spiritual plane, maybe not even spiritual. I think what's worse sometimes is when we only think of it as religion. Okay, so this really cool Jesuit priest that I like, called Monty Williams from Canada, he has this line from an Advent retreat that I attended just last Advent. He said, religion without spirituality just becomes ethics. Right? Religion without spirituality just become ethics. And spirituality ultimately is actually relationship. It's our relationship with God, which cannot happen without also our relationship with ourselves, right? And true spirituality will always spill out into relationship with others. And all that cannot happen without integration, without learning how these different parts of myself come together. So if I'm constantly insecure, so this is the case for me, okay? When it was happening all my life, I didn't have the vocabulary to understand. I wasn't even aware, for example, that I had codependency issues, okay? Because when you're in it, I mean, it's normal for you. You don't know that it's not normal, that it's not healthy. When I fell in love with Christ, I loved him a lot, but I was always so terrified of losing that love. And I was always constantly checking in with him and with God. Okay, God the Father is another issue. I think for the longest time, I couldn't even draw close to him because I have issues with father figures, I think. But with Christ, whom I loved, I was always so afraid that I would do something to lose that love. And even though I knew intellectually, so here's the thing, right? My mind understood that I couldn't lose that love. That's what the church teaches. That's what I was taught. But my heart didn't get the message. The body didn't get the message. I was divided. I was fragmented. So what that meant was in my lived life, and especially when I was in full-time pastoral ministry, right? And when my conscious intent was always to love others, sometimes my heart and my body doesn't follow what my mind wants to follow, right? What wants to do. The theological explanation for this, and I must put it in there because I know a lot of you watching may have heard this, right, is we talk about this is the nature of, this is what happens after the fall, right, our fallen nature. Okay, so that's a theological language. Our fallen nature means that we are fragmented. We are no longer whole. But I think it's not enough. Not just think, I know it's not enough just to have the theological language about that, because the theological language is not going to help us get integrated, okay? The theological language is not going to help us get integrated. We need to know what's the response then that we need to do. When God heals us, he doesn't heal us in abstract. He heals our emotional lives. He heals sometimes, the relationship we have with our bodies. There may not be perfect healing in this life, but the healing happens as part of that process of integration, right? If I had to give you an image, maybe imagine kind of like the center of gravity, right? We all have a center of gravity. If the center of gravity isn't low enough, if it isn't deep enough, if we're not living from a deep enough place, we're going to topple over very easily all the time, right? We're going to lose our balance. We're going to get confused, easily. But as we get more integrated, what happens is like the center of gravity for our living, it goes into a deeper and deeper place. Then even though, unexpected things still happen, we will still get triggered, we will still fail, but there is a part of us that deep inside that is very assured and confident and secure that in the end all is well. All is well because we know in a very deep part of ourselves that God holds us. And as we get more integrated, the different aspects of our lives, not just the different parts of ourselves, become more aligned, more in harmony, because we become more free from within to make choices to make that alignment happen around us, right? It's not about reaching a perfect ideal. I think when we have that in mind about the Christian life, that's why we are very disintegrated, because no one's there, man. No one's there, right? But when we understand it's about this process, this journey, and that it's ultimately also in God's time with God's grace, we can actually put our energy to knowing what is it that we can do right now, right? To grow a little bit more whole, to pay a little bit more attention to maybe just that one part. Maybe there are many parts in our lives that's a mess, and we're going to learn that that's okay, because we can only sometimes work on one thing at a time. But if you accumulate that one thing at a time over a matter of years and then decades, amazing things will build up. And that was kind of one of my recognitions in the retreat I just attended, which was basically a silent retreat. Okay, I met with a spiritual director twice over that period of 3 days, and but because I think this was a checking in with myself, and she knew that what I shared with her was, on the first night, I noticed, like I mentioned at the start of this live, I noticed my loneliness that I hadn't touched in a long while. And for the first time in my life, this is the first time in my life, I actually felt, oh, I'm glad it's there. I'm glad that loneliness is there, because it's important. It's important that I touch this place of loneliness in me. And I knew when I felt that way that I've really moved, because a long time ago, I was always, even unconsciously, subconsciously, running away from that loneliness. Right? I would try and fill it up with doing everything, anything to distract myself. And then I learned to kind of like confront the loneliness, to acknowledge it, but it was still very uncomfortable. I still didn't want it to be there. I wished at one point for a long, not just one point, for many years in my life, I wished that loneliness would go away. But then I found that loneliness was an important place to learn to be in. The door to solitude was in that loneliness, where my aloneness wasn't scary anymore, right? Now, the loneliness is also there for many reasons. I'm not going to go with the cause, because ultimately, whatever has happened in your life, whatever has happened in my life, while that may take time to unpack, God uses whatever has happened as the doorway to deeper intimacy with Him, right? So I realized that, wow, I actually now can appreciate that loneliness. I can actually feel that loneliness is important, and I'm glad to revisit it. And then on my last morning in the retreat, at the suggestion of my spiritual director, to do a dawn, to walk the labyrinth. The retreat center as a labyrinth at dawn. And she asked me to go down early enough that it was still completely dark. And I'm quite a scaredy cat, okay? Especially asking me to go out in the dark alone. And in this particular retreat center, you have to descend, quite a lot of steps. And it was really quite dark. And as I descended those steps, I felt fear, right? And as I got closer to the labyrinth, I saw there was a breeze, so I saw shadows, of trees, of the leaves and everything. So fear is another emotion that I've always not liked and not welcome. But what I found this time was that I could acknowledge that it was there. I could let it be there. Part of me, I think, through some of the new things I've learned, can even appreciate that. Okay, this means that the body and the brain and everything that God has given me is working well, because He designed me evolutionarily to be on alert when I'm in the dark and it's kind of like an unfamiliar place and there could be danger, right? So even that fear I recognized was a gift, and I could walk my way eventually to the point of to kind of be present to what I was going to do, to walk the labyrinth, to actually I ended up lying in the heart of the labyrinth and stargazing for a while, because it was clear that morning, and because it was dark, I could see the stars, and I hadn't seen that for so long. In Singapore, it's quite hard to see the stars, right? And I realized the fact that I now can welcome loneliness and fear. I hadn't even realized that I've moved that much. But that is an example of what I'm trying to say about integration. I know that I'm more integrated now because I'm more in harmony even with these difficult emotions that come up in my life, right? I still lose my balance, but it's easier to regain my balance. And Christ is at the heart of it. Christ is at the heart of it. He's the one that gives me That grace is the one that mends me together. When we don't know about integration and we don't know how important it is and we don't do the work that's needed to do to integrate, we can do a lot of damage trying to serve God and trying to love his people, because we are loving in a way that's very fragmented. We are not loving from a place that is held in love and wholeness. So for anyone who's listening, if you're busy, and I think most of us are, how can we not be busy, right? And you have so many things going on in your life, and you have so many responsibilities at work, at home, maybe as parents, and possibly also in community or in ministry. I invite you, as I close this live session, to consider this. What do you need to do to give room for some integration in your life? Because integration requires space, it requires room, it requires time. It requires a certain kind of journeying. And those of us with very crowded, saturated, busy lives, we usually don't make room for integration. And for those of you who sincerely wish to serve God and his church, I want to give you a very challenging thought to consider. For every month, every year that you prioritize doing things for God and God's people, right? Ministry over the work of integration, that's every month or year that you are giving up an opportunity to love better. Because without the work of integration, we can't see ourselves. We can't see how the way we want to love actually comes from maybe places of our own insecurity. We can become very hurtful and manipulative people even while wanting to do the best things. Consciously, we can be very loving. Consciously, we're really trying to love. And I say this as somebody who knows, because trust me, that's me my whole life. As far as I was conscious, I've always wanted to love God, to love my neighbor. And I always felt I sucked at it because I kept failing over and over. And even when I wanted to do only what was good for others, I ended up hurting others. And it was only after I learned about what integration meant and I started doing this work that I really, really saw that I can love God better and love my neighbor better. Okay, and I didn't know that what was the missing link was learning to love myself, right? And that's the work of integration. So, hi to those of you who are popping in and joining. I hope you enjoy this live. I'm going to be posting it, after this as part of the IGTV to this account. So you're welcome to rewatch it. If you have any thoughts, and if you missed the live right now, please DM me. I would really welcome your thoughts and your questions, because that could give me material also to know what to share about next time I do this. Okay? Yes, hi. All right, so take care, everyone. Have a good Sunday afternoon. God bless.